we've got our FBX, we've got our cutting board texture, and we've got our HDR, and we are ready for substance. So let's dive in. Let's make a new project. Just like Maya, projects are important. They keep all of our stuffs. So we are going to be using PBR metal roughness workflow. And this is very common. This is kind of becoming the standard, this sort of metal roughness thing for a standard for materials and textures. It's very similar to how RenderMan works, a RenderMan material. It's how Unity and Unreal work. So we're going to stick with that. We need to get our model. Select. Okay, here we are. So this is the cutting board we exported. This is the scene that I exported. And I'm going to use this just because I want there to be a couple more things for you guys to see. We're mostly going to focus on the cutting board, so you guys can just use your cutting board. So open it up. For some reason, Substance always asks me to do it twice. It doesn't trust me, and it shouldn't. All right. So we're going to go with document resolution 2048. I may have to switch it to 1024 just because my computer is not very good and it has problems with the 2048. This right here, this area is in case you were going to do a high to low bake. So if you guys had used ZBrush and you made like a really good ZBrush sculpt and you want to bake out a normal map, you could do it in here instead of doing in Maya. Now, I know many people would ask, why don't I just do it in Maya? Well, because the Maya high to low normal baker is kind of awful. And to be honest, nobody uses it. It's much safer, much more convenient to use it in Substance Painter, where it really works better. So you just go to Add, and you add your high resolution model in here, and your low resolution model up here, and when we bake out maps, we can bake out that high to low. We don't have that. We're not dealing with any of that nonsense. We just got a cutting board, and we're going to make the detail in here. So, okay. And we have our project. Yeah. Now, I have a couple of things in here. You'll recognize all of these are from the actual assignment that we were doing, the RenderMan assignment. Now, this is very interesting because we have this sort of dual view, right? And I like this workflow. We have this view right here, which kind of has our UVs all laid out. And then we have this 3D view here. And we can actually go up here and we can turn things off and on. We can pick the asset we have selected, which is the cutting board. We can move to like the bread or the tablecloth, and it would switch what we can actually work on. And we can grab this, and we're just going to solo the cutting board right now. So this is pretty cool. And up here, we can switch between like 3D only work view, and we can switch between 2D only and 2D 3D. Commands are going to work a lot similar to what they do in Maya. I'm using my tablet, by the way. We are not doing mouse and keyboard in Substance. We are not mouse and keyboard people when it comes to texturing. So if we hold Alt, left click, we can pan and zoom, or we can sort of rotate around. Alt, middle mouse, or right mouse will zoom in. That's right mouse. Forgot where I put my right mouse button on my tablet. And middle mouse is panning. So, you know, exactly the same as we're used to in Maya. F key will recenter the camera. You know, Command Z will undo. Lots of things we're familiar with. The one new thing is that we have these environment controls. So environment opacity and environment blur. So we can see that there's a dome in here, right? Dome light, same as we're used to. It's kind of blurred out, and I usually like to keep mine on a little bit so I can see what's going on. But the cool thing is, if we hold Shift and right mouse, we rotate the dome, which changes our lighting, because it works exactly as a dome light in RenderMan. So, super cool. And that gives us lighting, which really just doesn't affect our textures at all. It just affects how we see the textures. And if we adjust exposure, which is currently at 0, we can give more light or less light through the dome light. It's kind of like if we were in Maya and we just pumped up the intensity. We're just going to leave that at 0. We can actually change the IBL, the image, by just kind of picking new ones. So let's get the opacity up and the blur down, and we can see we're in a jungle now. Lots of cutting boards in jungles, huh? Ooh. actually go with this one. This is kind of nice. Very low light situation though. The last thing is we can actually turn the wireframe on, so we can actually see the wireframe on our model. I'm going to leave that off for the most part, but it's good to know it's there. And with that all done, I want to get into what this stuff is. So this is all of our different materials. You'll notice that the knife and the knife handle are separate, and this is because it splits it up based on materials. So you can have one object with multiple materials, and in Substance it'll read as two different objects. Just get used to that workflow because that's how it's going to work when we're in Substance. One material, one texture map. That's what you get. We go over here to the texture set settings. We'll notice here's where all of our channels are. So I talked a little bit about this in my intro video. Base color, this is sort of what we're used to thinking of as texture. Height, this has to do with our bump maps or our normal maps or whatever. Roughness, this is going to be how diffused our reflection are, and metallic is going to be how much metallic is actually coming in. If we're talking render band, this is going to be edge color. Normal, this gets a little bit confusing because you have height and normal. What? Why would I have height and normal? So there are a couple of brushes that actually paint normal map. That specific information goes in this channel. We're not really going to be dealing with that, and so we're just going to turn it off. If we're baking to a normal map, we can still bake from height to normal. So don't worry about that if you guys are in MCR or something and you're going to bake to a normal map, or if you're in another class, you go into a game engine, you can just bake straight from height to normal. A couple of other channels that I like to talk about that we could add, and there's a bunch in here. Ambient occlusion, we all remember that from 3DF, and that's a pretty good one. We won't be using it today. One of my favorites, though, is down here. Opacity is kind of good. Emissive, there it is. Emissive, this is if you want anything to produce like a self-glow. It's very good if you have like lights on your asset, like if we had a chest and it had lights in it. Emissive sort of does that sort of thing. And I once saw a demo where they had like a lava monster and all of the lava was glowing. That was done with emissive, so that was pretty cool. Those are some of the channels I like to use. We're going to stick with standard PBR. Base color, height, roughness, metallic. Good to go. The first thing we need to do, starting any Substance project, is we need to bake our texture maps. So we're going to bake textures. And this little window comes up. So normal, that has to do if we're doing the high resolution model to the low resolution. We're not doing that. We're just going to turn that off. World space normal, this is pretty cool. Material ID we don't need. World space normal uses to track the position of the face to do procedural stuff. Ambient occlusion, we remember that. We're going to tell it self-occlude only the same mesh. If you only have one asset, you don't need to worry about this. I have multiple things in my scene, so I do have to worry about that. Curvature, position, thickness, we're going to keep all of this. I'm, again, going to go only same mesh. And then I'm going to just bake my cutting board. I could bake all textures. I'm just going to bake the cutting board. There we go. And now we have these maps that are added. And they will also be added to our textures right here. There's one more thing before we really get started in what Substance can do. We need to go import a resource. And we're going to add just a couple things. So we're going to add our cutting board. And we're going to add our Zen Garden. So the Zen Garden is an HDRI. It's kind of a dome light. It's what we use in SL right now. And the cutting board, this is our tileable texture. So we're going to tell this, you're a texture. We're going to tell this, you're an environment. You'll notice we also have alpha. If any of you guys are familiar with alphas in ZBrush. So we'll talk a little bit about what alphas do in one of our other videos. Now, with that said, we need to decide where we want these to be saved. So we could save them to our shelf forever. We could save them to our current session, which means it's there until we close Substance Painter, or until Substance Painter crashes. I generally don't like that, because if it crashes, then I lose my stuff and I have to reload it. I'm going to save it to the current project. Import. And since we saved to the current project, that's a good time to save. All right, save our project. Okay, with all that done, we can see our textures in here. We're now ready to begin having some fun. First off, I want my Zen garden. There we go. And I'm going to turn the opacity down a little bit and increase the blur. But we still have the lighting, very soft lighting. Let me actually increase the exposure a little bit. Anyway, let's move on. So over here, we're going to go to our layers. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a fill layer. This is like using the paint bucket tool in Photoshop for a whole layer. And so with that fill layer, I'm just going to grab this cutting board and put it in my base color. And that just gets us started. So we have a nice cutting board here as our base level. And so with our base level, we can see here that we've got some repeating going on. I definitely could have repeated my texture a little bit better in Photoshop, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to take the repeating right out of that. And I could actually rotate it if I wanted to. I don't want to, but what I am going to do is I'm going to offset it a little bit. There we go. That looks good. Now there is a little bit of UV stretching, but it isn't really noticeable, and it's not going to be noticeable in our renders, so I'm not particularly worried about that. Now, layers work very similar to they do in Photoshop. A fill layer is a layer that is completely filled with whatever texture properties you put into it, and a regular layer allows you to paint blankly. So it's like a blank layer, blank cell. All right, guys, that's all of the basics set up. With this, we're ready to dive right in, and we'll check with that in one of your next videos.